Yeah, this election campaign is still relatively young, but I think we've already encountered what might be the most annoying saga throughout this. And it is a bit of a saga, OK, but bear with me. I'm going to explain where that £2,000 figure that we've heard about from the Prime Minister actually comes from, but also a few other things besides. And in a sense, this is a tale of three dossiers, and also, as well as that, a letter. We'll come to the letter in a second, OK? But let's start with the first of these dossiers. This is a dossier from the Conservative Party, and it was produced just last month. And the idea behind this dossier is, basically, we haven't had the manifestos yet, and what they're trying to do is to guess what Labour might be introducing when it comes to their spending and their tax policies, and working out if there is a difference. And guess what? There is a difference, because there is for all of these parties, because they like to talk more about the spending than they do about the taxes. So here's the numbers that they came up with, and they used, in part, Treasury statistics to try and come up with these figures. Basically, this is the extra spending that they say Labour is potentially going to do over the course of the coming years if they were to get into government, so the next 4 years. And there were various things in there you might recognise. So there's the Green Prosperity Plan that Keir Starmer's talked an awful lot about, but there's other things besides. And like I say, lots of these numbers came from the Treasury. You had Conservative SPADs, so special advisors, requested those figures from the Treasury and they produced them. Then you've got where they're going to raise taxes, and again, you might recognise a few of them, things like VAT and business rates on private school fees, but what you can probably make out is, look, the taxes are less than the spendings, whatever thus. And when you take one away from the other, you end up with this, OK? So a grand total figure, you've got about £10 billion a year of extra spending that you haven't really accounted for how you're going to pay for it, and top that up and you get £38.5 billion. It's a lot of money, and what they've done is basically they've divided that figure by the total number of households around the country. So it's about 18.5 million households, and you get about £500 per household of a kind of black hole that we don't really know where it's going to come from. And if you tot it all up, look, there it is, £2,094 per household. So that is where this figure that Rishi Sunak was talking about in the debate actually comes from. Now, Labour has various different quibbles with the number. They say, for instance, OK, so when you look at those sums that the Treasury was asked to do, you know, they don't think that, for instance, neighbourhood health centres is going to cost quite so much. They don't think necessarily that there's something called insourcing, where you're bringing in some of the expertise into government. They don't think that's necessarily going to cost quite as much as in the numbers. So there's that. But there's a broader issue which they're talking about, which is they say that really it's questionable as to whether the Treasury should be doing this. And we just got a letter, this is where the letter comes in, from the head of the Treasury, the Permanent Secretary at the Treasury, James Bowler, basically saying, I'll zoom in here, saying, OK, I agree that costings derived from other sources, so other than the Treasury, produced by other organisations, should not be presented as having been produced by the civil service. And that matters because last night, when it was in the debate, Rishi Sunak was kind of implying that these were either Treasury costings or independent costings. Well, they're not, and that's the point that we have here, which raises deeper questions about this. But Labour might have said something else, OK? So when you're talking about this £2,000, what about the tax rises that we've already had over the course of the last Parliament? If you tot them up, and I've basically done the same thing, just looking at the rise in the tax burden over that period, tot them up, divide it by the number of households, and it's not £2,000, it's £13,000. That's taxes that we already have as a result of the taxes that have come in during this Parliament. But Labour didn't do that. They saw the Tories, some would say, dodgy dossier, and they said, well, let's just do our own dodgy dossier. And I'm afraid it's a little bit more dodgy. Maybe that's partly because they don't have the benefit of using the Treasury to put their sums together. But what they basically do, and we're doing the same thing again, so looking at the kind of black hole implied by all of those spending plans, all those various different ambitions that we heard about, in this case, from the Conservatives. So this is Labour's plans, Conservative plans as Labour would portray them. And when you look at the big numbers here, this bar here is very big indeed, far bigger than the black hole that the Tories were saying that Labour have. And largely that's because of various policies, including this, scrapping national insurance, really big. And frankly, the Tories, they've never said they're going to do that on day one, but Labour, in their dodgy dossier, are saying, look, the Tories are going to do that. They say they're going to abolish inheritance tax. Well, maybe they'd like to do that, but no one's quite assuming they're going to do that in day one. And anyway, as I say, we don't have the manifestos. But if you go through this, do the same sums as we saw from the Conservatives, this comes out at £14,000 per household. OK, so that's the black hole that Labour are talking about in the Conservative plans. So there we have it. Two dossiers, one letter. But I'm afraid, yes, there is one more dossier left, because when the Conservatives saw that Labour dossier, they said, well, maybe ours in the first place was a bit too conservative with a small c, so let's do our own new dossier. And it's even more wild. Have a look at this, okay? So basically, this is doing the same thing, showing how much each household will be affected each year by the various different plans that the Conservatives say Labour might introduce, okay? It includes stuff like cutting corporation tax to 12.5%. It includes scrapping business rate. I mean, no one really thinks Labour is going to do this stuff, but nonetheless, the Tories put this into a document, and it comes up with, if you work it out in the same way as we've seen from all those other documents, a grand total of £46,000 per household. It is kind of a staggering situation, but we've got to this descent in the campaign already, and there are lots of numbers being thrown around, and quite a lot of them are pretty ridiculous.